A millionaire returned home early after signing a contract to surprise his stepwife and his young daughter who was afflicted with autism. But as the mansion gates slowly appeared, the scene inside the house immediately filled the millionaire with rage. The lights in the penthouse conference room of the Hayes Food Building turned off, giving way to the dazzling city lights of Chicago outside the glass window. Ethan Hayes stood up, buttoning his suit jacket, accepting the congratulatory handshakes from his partners. After 12 hours of intense negotiation, his clean food empire had officially merged with a major supply chain in the Midwest. At 40, Ethan possessed the resolute face of a seasoned businessman and a career anyone would envy. He walked toward his private office, his steps echoing on the glossy hardwood floor. On his desk, amidst a towering stack of files, was a small photo frame. In the picture, a gentle smiling woman was holding a little girl with large round eyes. That was Sarah, his late wife, and Maya, their daughter. Sarah had left him and Maya 3 years ago in a tragic drowning accident. Since then, Ethan had buried himself in work as a way to keep his mind from falling into the void of loneliness. A soft ding from his phone interrupted his thoughts. A message from Tiffany, the wife he had married just over a year ago. Tiffany was young, energetic, and always seemed to perfectly fill the space Sarah had left. She regularly sent him detailed reports on the condition of his 8-year-old autistic daughter. "Darling, is the meeting over? Maya just finished her piano lesson. She played very well and is now sleeping like an angel. Please don't worry about a thing. I'm taking excellent care of her." Attached was a photo. Maya was lying on her side, in bed, soft yellow nightlight illuminating her small face. Ethan looked at the picture, smiling with relief. He was about to turn off his phone, but a small detail made his finger pause. He zoomed in on the photo, looking at Maya's hands resting loosely on the pillow. The hands were empty. Maya was an autistic child with unshakable routines. For the past 3 years since her mother passed away, she never went to sleep without tightly hugging the worn-out teddy bear that Sarah had given her. That teddy bear was the only security object that helped her feel safe in her silent world. Maya sleeping without it was extremely rare, if not unprecedented. A flicker of concern sparked in Ethan's heart. Could Maya have progressed to the point where she no longer needed her comfort object, or was she experiencing a psychological issue that Tiffany hadn't had a chance to mention? "Captain Miller, prepare the plane. I want to fly back to Connecticut tonight." "Mr. Hayes, the weather forecast indicates a major snowstorm is heading for the East Coast. Most flights have been delayed. Taking off now will be very turbulent and risky." "I understand, but I need to be home before morning. Can you manage it?" "If you insist, I will do my best. Please be at the airport in 30 minutes. Ethan quickly gathered his belongings. He didn't notify Tiffany. He wanted to surprise her and also wanted to check for himself how much Maya had truly changed. He always felt guilty for leaving Tiffany to bear so much responsibility for caring for a special child like Maya, while he was preoccupied with multi-million-dollar projects. He had compensated her with unlimited wire transfers, hoping that affluence would bring happiness to his small family. The jet plunged into the dark gray night of Chicago. Inside the luxurious cabin, Ethan couldn't focus on the open merger files. He opened his family financial management application, a habit for a businessman. He scrolled through the expenditures of the past few months. The funds transferred to Tiffany for Maya's care had spiked dramatically. Bills for behavioral therapists, private nurses, and high-end dietary supplements amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars each month. Ethan was curious and clicked on the details of a payment named Pinecrest Special Support Center. He had never heard Tiffany mention this place. He thought to himself, it must be a new therapy she just found. He felt fortunate to have such a dedicated wife so he could focus on work in Chicago. The blizzard caused the plane to shake violently like a leaf in the void. The wind howled through the gap, sounding bone-chilling. After more than 3 stressful hours, the plane landed at the private airport in Connecticut. Snow covered the ground, thickly limiting visibility. His private driver called to report that the highway leading to the mansion was jammed due to a traffic incident. "It's fine, I'll drive the SUV from the airport garage myself," Ethan replied over the phone. He drove the high-clearance vehicle, navigating through the suburban roads blanketed in white snow. Connecticut at night was quiet, only the sound of tires crunching on the thick snow. The closer he got to home, the more restless Ethan became. He imagined walking into the room, finding Maya asleep, and gently placing the teddy bear in her hand, something he was sure Tiffany had simply forgotten somewhere in the room when taking the photo. As the car turned onto the main driveway of the secluded Hayes mansion, Ethan suddenly slammed on the brakes. From a distance, his usually quiet mansion was ablaze with light, but it wasn't the warm light of a home. Flashing colored lights were strung up in the main foyer, and the loud thumping music tore through the stillness of the stormy night. Ethan raised an eyebrow in surprise. Tiffany had told him she was exhausted from taking care of Maya, and usually went to bed right after the child was settled. He checked the time, almost 2 a.m. Ethan turned off the car lights and didn't press the button to open the main gate via his mobile app as usual. He felt a strange contradiction between his wife's words and the scene before him. If Maya was sleeping soundly as she claimed, why was the music so loud? He steered, driving slowly onto the small side path leading to the back fence, an area typically used by the gardeners. Ethan Hayes stood still by the cedar fence, gazing at the mansion that was once his home. The cold seeped through his expensive leather gloves. He circled around to the back where a rusty side gate was usually used by the garden staff. Ethan gripped the cold iron bar and vaulted over. He didn't want to trigger the alarm system at the front door. Tiffany controlled everything through her phone, and he didn't want her to know he was back. Ethan landed in the deep snow, his footsteps sinking. He concealed himself in the shadows of the trees, surveying the entire estate. The central living room area was brightly lit. Through the large glass doors, Ethan saw people moving around holding wine glasses, laughing and chatting merrily. The music pulsed rhythmically and steadily. Ethan's gaze shifted to the west wing. That was where he had spent millions of dollars on renovations. He had hired the best architects to design a therapy room, a playroom, and a modern bedroom for Maya. He wanted his daughter to have her own sanctuary. But now the entire area was pitch black. Not a single light, no sign of life. Ethan struggled to walk through the snow. He headed toward the entrance of the west wing and suddenly froze. The snow here was deep, pristine white and undisturbed. There were no footprints, no signs of recent clearing. Tiffany had reported to him that Maya had daily therapy, that doctors and nurses came and went frequently. Ethan wondered, if Maya goes to therapy every day, why is the pathway so covered in snow? This inconsistency tightened the knot in Ethan's chest. He continued circling around the back of the west wing where a small detached shed was located. This was typically used to store old items and disused garden equipment. As he approached, Ethan saw a faint light flickering from the ground floor window. A layer of frost covered the glass, obstructing his view. Ethan wiped away the cold layer of ice. He pressed his face close to the small window, hoping to find an explanation for the silence of the main house. But what he saw caused his breath to catch in his throat. Maya was not in the warm bedroom he had imagined. She was in this dismal shed. The room was dusty, cluttered with old wooden crates and broken furniture. Maya sat huddled in a dark corner, wearing only a thin, oversized, dirty t-shirt. Her bare feet were purple with cold. Ethan was stunned. He gasped, "My God, Maya." "Why are you here?" The little girl couldn't hear him. Maya was trying to press her thin body against the heat pipe running along the bottom of the wall. That was the only heat source in this cold room. Maya's eyes were wide open, staring blankly into space, unfocused. She was continuously rocking her body back and forth, a repetitive, unconscious movement. Ethan knew this was his daughter's way of trying to self-soothe when in a state of extreme panic. This sight tore the father's heart apart. Ethan realized that all the glowing reports, all the happy photos Tiffany sent him were lies. Maya was being treated worse than an animal right inside her own home. A feeling of guilt overwhelmed Ethan. He had been too busy with food contracts, too trusting of the money he sent home, and had forgotten to directly protect his child. Ethan clenched his fist. He couldn't stand by for another second. He looked for something heavy to smash the window. He wanted to rush in immediately to carry Maya out of this hellish place. "Daddy's coming, Maya. I'm going to take you out." Ethan mumbled, his hand grasping a large stone beneath the snow. Just as he raised the stone, the click of a lock echoed from inside the shed. The heavy wooden door swung open, and the hallway light shone in, slicing through the darkness of the room. A tall woman's silhouette entered, obstructing Ethan's view. It was Tiffany. She stood there holding a glass of wine, her shadow stretching long over Maya's trembling body. Ethan froze. He held his breath quickly, pressing himself into the dark spot next to the window. He drew himself in, his heart pounding so hard he feared she would hear it. Ethan gripped the stone tightly in his hand, his eyes fixed on the back of the woman he once called his wife. Tiffany walked closer to Maya. The light from the hallway shone on her face, revealing a cold expression Ethan had never seen outside of a phone screen. Tiffany tilted her head, her voice cutting through the silence. "Still awake, you useless thing." Ethan stood silently in the dark, his hands shaking with fury. He knew he couldn't act rashly now. He needed to see everything. He needed to know how far this woman's cruelty extended. The light from the hallway lamp made Ethan squint. Instead of a hug or a caring word, she used the sharp heel of her high-heeled shoe to kick away the old plastic tray on the floor. Crumbs of dry bread scattered into the dark corner. The half-frozen bottle of filtered water also rolled underfoot. Tiffany walked toward the tattered old sofa in the corner, casually sat down and propped her feet up on the decaying wooden table. She took a sip of wine, her eyes showing clear contempt as she looked at Maya. "Still sitting there, you useless thing. Look at your face, Maya. Do you know your presence is the curse of my life?" Tiffany laughed faintly, her eyes fixed on the unfortunate child. She began to murmur as if unburdening herself of a long-held weight. "I was planning a getaway to Paris with my friends next week, but I had to cancel just because old Ethan insisted on a FaceTime call to see your vacant face. I have to pretend to smile and pretend to love you in front of the camera. Do you know how much I despise that?" Tiffany placed the wine glass on the table, her voice growing sharper. She was no longer the gentle wife Ethan saw on his phone screen every night. "That old man thinks the money he sends back is for fancy nurses and high-end supplements for you. That's hilarious. I got rid of those annoying nurses and tutors 6 months ago. Your daddy's money is now in my account for me to buy these bags and dresses. As for you, this corner is already too luxurious." Ethan stood outside the window, feeling the surge of rage. He heard every brazen confession from Tiffany. She had deceived him for the past 6 months, turning his daughter into a tool for profit. Tiffany suddenly stood up and walked closer to Maya. She bent down, the darkness obscuring half her face, making her look like a predator. Tiffany leaned close to Maya's ear, whispering venomous words. "Listen carefully. If you dare to make a sound, or let your dad know about this when he returns, I will tell him you've gone insane. Your dad hates anything troublesome. He'll send you to a dark mental institution where you'll never see the light again. He'll abandon you forever, understand?" Maya couldn't reply with words. She trembled violently, her small hands covering her ears as if to block those cruel words from penetrating her mind. She curled up as small as possible, nodding continuously in extreme fear. This was the reaction of a child who had been emotionally mistreated for too long, an obedience born of survival instinct. Tiffany seemed satisfied with Maya's reaction. She straightened up, drank the rest of her wine, and turned to walk out. The sound of her high heels clicking on the wooden floor was crisp. She slammed the heavy wooden door shut. A loud clang echoed as she secured the large metal padlock onto the hasp, locking Maya inside the darkness and cold of the stormy night. Outside the window, Ethan's vision blurred with fury. The blood in his body felt like it was boiling. He couldn't endure watching his daughter imprisoned like a convict for another moment. Ethan clenched his fist veins bulging along his arm. He intended to use all his strength to deliver a powerful punch to the glass, to shatter it, to rush in and carry Maya out. Just as his fist was mere inches from the glass, an old but strong hand unexpectedly gripped his shoulder from behind. Ethan was pulled back, a restraining force preventing him from moving. "Don't do it, you'll hurt the little girl." A hoarse, soft, but authoritative voice spoke close to Ethan's ear. He paused, his breath ragged. Ethan turned around, meeting a wrinkled face with incredibly bright eyes under a weak flashlight beam. It was Mr. David, the neighbor, whom Tiffany had long called that senile old man. Mr. David looked at Ethan, shaking his head to signal silence, his hand still firmly gripping the shoulder of the distraught father. The old man's appearance in the middle of this snowstorm carried a secret Ethan had never suspected. Whose mysterious hand tightly gripped Ethan's shoulder, a hidden ally or an accomplice to the crime? The truth behind the cold shed door doesn't just stop at mistreatment. Continue following to witness the silent rescue begin. Old Mr. David's hand gripped Ethan's shoulder, pulling him forcefully back. They sank deep into the thick darkness of the dense cedar trees. Snow from the branches fell covering Ethan's expensive wool coat, but he no longer felt the cold. In his mind, there was only the image of Maya huddled by the heat pipe and Tiffany's sickening smile. "You're crazy, Ethan. If you smash the door now, she'll call the police and report you for assault immediately. You know the law in Connecticut. They'll handcuff you before they hear your explanation." Mr. David's voice was a whisper, but carried weight. Ethan breathed heavily, his chest heaving beneath his coat. He looked into his neighbor's resolute eyes and nodded with difficulty. The two hurried across the snow-covered yard into Mr. David's house. As they stepped through the door, a wave of warmth enveloped them. Ethan was startled when he saw the old doctor's living room. Everywhere were small wooden toys, little trucks, toy soldiers, and even meticulously carved dolls. All were brightly painted and lined up on the bookshelf. "I made these for Maya, one item each week, but I was never able to get them past your gate. Tiffany threw my first gift into the trash right in front of me." Ethan looked at the toys, then thought of the dusty shed. The contrast made his throat feel bitter. He sat down on the armchair, covering his face with his hands. "I sent thousands of dollars every month. I thought money could buy the best care. I'm a terrible father, David." "You're just a busy father who trusted too much." "But she is not simple. Look at this." Mr. David placed an old leather-bound notebook on the table. Inside were detailed notes marked by date and time. It was a professional observation diary of a doctor. "I started taking notes 6 months ago when I saw her dismiss Maya's private nurse. She replaced the entire electronic lock system. The new hired help were all immigrants who didn't speak English. They came to clean and left immediately. No one was allowed to stay or talk to the neighbors." Ethan flipped through the pages. He stopped at the entries about reporting calls. "You called Child Protective Services 3 times, but Tiffany always knew how to handle it. Every time they came, she dressed Maya in her best clothes, took the child into that $1 million therapy room you built. She told them I was a senile old man who hated women and constantly tried to harass her life. Maya couldn't speak, so they couldn't find any evidence of abuse." Mr. David opened his phone and showed Ethan a few pictures. In the photos, Maya was picking up crumbs of bread dropped on the lawn in the backyard, while Tiffany sat casually on an armchair nearby, scrolling through her phone. She spread rumors throughout the neighborhood that Maya suffered from early onset aggressive psychosis. She told everyone not to come near because the child might attack anyone. That's how she completely isolated the child so no one would suspect anything when they saw Maya locked up. Ethan looked at the phone screen, his hands trembling. He realized his own neglect had aided Tiffany. He had believed too much in the happy FaceTime photos, unaware that behind them was a living nightmare. His trust in the power of money had made him blind. Just then, looking from the living room window toward the Hayes mansion, the headlights of a sports car flashed brightly. The roar of the engine ripped through the quiet night. Tiffany stepped out of the front door wearing a luxurious fur coat. She got into the bright red convertible, a gift Ethan had given her for their first wedding anniversary. "Where is she going at this hour? It's a storm outside, isn't it?" "It's like this every Friday, Ethan. Spa parties and nightclubs downtown. She won't be back before 4 in the morning. She always leaves the child alone in that shed." The sports car sped away, leaving 2 long tire tracks on the white snow. The automatic iron gate closed with a dry clang. Ethan stood up from the chair. The feeling of pain and regret suddenly vanished, replaced by a terrifying coldness. His eyes fixed on the dark mansion's west wing. He was no longer a father crushed by grief. At this moment, he was a millionaire who had faced dozens of formidable competitors in the market to build his food empire. He adjusted his collar, taking a deep breath. "She will never have the chance to touch my daughter again. Tonight, Maya will not sleep in that cold stone cave." Ethan turned to look at Mr. David. He knew he couldn't break into Tiffany's modern security system without leaving a trace if he used the front door. He needed a quieter, more decisive approach. "David, you said you were a pediatrician, but I remember you once told me that in your youth you worked for a security equipment company to earn tuition money, right?" The old doctor looked at Ethan. He immediately understood the man's intention. He smiled slightly, a smile of understanding and agreement. "I still have a habit of collecting things related to mechanics. There are some electronic locks that basic physical tools can prevent." Ethan nodded. He stepped close to Mr. David, his voice sharp and decisive, as if making an important merger decision. "I need to borrow your lock-picking tools right now." Mr. David brought out a small cloth bag containing thin, flat steel tools. Ethan took the set, the cold feel of the metal against his palm, making him more alert than ever. The two men didn't say another word, quietly opened the back door of David's house, and crossed the cedar fence. The snow was falling thicker, obscuring visibility and swallowing their footsteps. They approached the side door leading into the mansion's kitchen. This was the entrance Tiffany rarely paid attention to. Ethan knelt before the latest electronic lock. He removed the outer casing, revealing the wires and mechanical latch inside. Memories from 15 years ago flooded back. Back then, when he was first starting his business, Ethan spent hours in an old car garage, fixing everything from engines to broken locks. The hands of the millionaire were now doing the work of a mechanic. He used a thin steel bar to slide into the gap, listening for every soft click from inside the lock's latch. "I haven't forgotten the trade yet." "Hurry up, Ethan. We don't have much time." The last latch opened. Ethan gently pushed the door, and the warmth from inside radiated out. He stepped in, but the familiar feeling of the house had completely vanished. Sarah's gentle landscape paintings, the family photos in the hallway were all gone. Instead, there were large mirrors with splendid gold frames and oversized portraits of Tiffany hanging everywhere. She had turned the house into a shrine to herself. This change made Ethan feel nauseous. He realized he had allowed a stranger to erase all traces of his late wife from this home. The two didn't stop in the main foyer, but headed straight for the corridor leading to the shed in the back. Ethan carried a small crowbar taken from the tool rack near the kitchen. He stood before the wooden door of the shed where the large metal padlock separated him from his daughter. He hooked the end of the crowbar into the lock hasp, putting his full body weight into a strong push. The sound of metal snapping echoed in the stillness. Ethan kicked the door open. A smell of mildew, filth, and cold air rushed into his nose. He turned on his flashlight, the beam sweeping across the dark room, stopping at the corner where Maya was sitting. The little girl flinched, curling up tightly. Maya covered her face with both hands, her thin shoulders trembling violently. She didn't cry or scream, just waited silently for a scolding or insults, as usual. Ethan's heart tightened. He dropped the crowbar to the floor and slowly knelt in front of his child. "Maya, it's Daddy. I'm home. Beautiful." The little girl didn't move. Ethan moved closer and took off his warm wool coat. He didn't rush to touch her, knowing that autistic children are sensitive to sudden contact. He draped the coat around Maya. The familiar scent of his cologne and laundry detergent from Ethan's coat spread. Maya slowly lowered her hands, her eyes gradually looking up. As she felt her father's warmth and scent, her rigid body slowly relaxed. Maya collapsed into Ethan's arms, her small hands clinging tightly to his neck. She couldn't speak, but her ragged breathing made Ethan realize how lonely his child had been. "I won't leave you here anymore. Let's go." Ethan scooped Maya up. On the way out, he glanced at the room in the west wing where a sign read, "Maya's Therapy Room." The door wasn't locked. He gently pushed it open and looked inside. It was completely empty, no support equipment, no sign of any medical tools. Instead, the room was filled with stacks of expensive imported wine crates and a set of Tiffany's high-end yoga mats lying in the center of the floor. Ethan tightened his grip on Maya, running across the snow-covered yard. He didn't care that the snow was soaking his leather shoes. He just wanted to get Maya out of this deadly place as quickly as possible. They returned to David's house. The old doctor quickly wrapped the child in a warm blanket. He made a cup of hot cocoa and gave it to Maya. "Drink this, Maya. You're safe here." The little girl held the cup of cocoa with her trembling hands. Watching Maya sip the warm drink, the light gradually returned to her eyes, and Ethan felt a slight relief. He sat on the floor next to his daughter, his hand never leaving her small one. "David, I want to take her away tonight. I'll fly to Chicago or anywhere as long as it's not this place." "You can't do that, Ethan. You're a millionaire, but Tiffany is your legal wife, and she has custody rights when you're away. If you take Maya without legal proof of her mistreatment, she'll call the police and report you for child abduction. With her influence here, she'll portray you as a crazy father and gain control of everything." Ethan was silent. He knew David was right. U.S. law is very strict regarding custody rights. If he acted on impulse, he could lose Maya forever to Tiffany if she used his money to hire the best lawyers. He needed evidence that no lawyer could refute. Living evidence that recorded the entire truth. "I have to go back to that house." "Are you planning to confront her now?" "No, I'll go back alone before she returns. I need Tiffany to take off her mask herself on camera. I won't let the little girl go back to that shed again, but I have to show the world what she's done." Ethan stood up, adjusting his clothes, which were stained with snow and dirt. He looked at Maya one last time. She was calmer now under David's care. He knew he was stepping into a psychological battle with the woman who had deceived him for the past year. "David, watch her. Lock the doors and don't let anyone see Maya here." "Be careful, Ethan. She's shrewder than you think." Ethan nodded. He turned and walked out of the warmth of David's house. The storm wind still howled outside, but inside him now was only an extreme coldness. He headed straight for Tiffany's brightly lit mansion, where he would personally set a trap for the betrayer. Ethan Hayes stepped through the back door, returning inside the mansion. Silence filled the space, broken only by the sound of wind whistling through the cracks. He opened the carry-on suitcase he brought from the plane and placed it on the kitchen counter. Inside were not merger files or multi-million-dollar contracts, but miniature surveillance equipment. This was the latest camera system he used to monitor automated food production lines in his factory, capable of recording sharp audio and video even in the dark. Ethan moved quickly and efficiently. He attached one camera to the eyes of a large decorative teddy bear placed in the corner of the living room, which had a panoramic view of the entire foyer. Next, he climbed onto a chair, hiding another device in the gap between the crystal chandeliers on the ceiling. Finally, he returned to the dismal shed. He placed an audio and video recorder in a hidden corner behind the pile of decaying wooden crates aimed directly at the heat pipe where Maya had sat. Ethan connected everything to his personal cloud server. He checked the signal on his tablet. The images were clear. He looked at the shed room one last time and decided to leave the wooden door slightly ajar, the broken padlock still lying in the snow outside. He wanted Tiffany to think that Maya had escaped by herself or was hiding somewhere in the garden when she returned. He needed to see her most natural reaction, the utter indifference of this woman, to use as evidence in court. Ethan went upstairs to the master bedroom. On the opulent dressing table amidst expensive perfume bottles, he found a small leather-bound notebook haphazardly placed among the cosmetics. It was Tiffany's expenditure diary. Ethan flipped through the pages. The figures that appeared made his jaw clench. $50,000 for a yacht party. Note, special psychological therapy costs for Maya. $12,000 for a new jewelry collection. Note, imported brain supplements for daughter. Each line of Tiffany's neat handwriting felt like a slap in the face to Ethan. Ethan closed the notebook. He no longer felt hurt, only a coldness that engulfed his mind. He retreated into his old office at the end of the second-floor hallway. This room had a small vent looking straight down onto the living room in the main entryway. He turned off all the lights, opened his tablet, and waited. The roar of a car engine from the main gate cut through the silence. Tiffany was back. Ethan watched on the screen as the sports car stopped right in front of the foyer. Tiffany walked into the house, brushed the snow off her fur coat, and carelessly tossed her expensive designer bag onto the sofa. She didn't glance toward the West Wing, nor did she have any intention of checking on the 8-year-old child who was sleeping soundly in the storm. Tiffany walked straight to the bar, pouring herself a large glass of wine. She reached out and turned on the central speaker system. Music started to throb. She sipped her wine while pressing the video call button on her phone, placing it on the table and sitting down with a relaxed demeanor. "Hey, what do you think of this necklace? It's 18-karat gold." Another woman's voice echoed from the phone speaker. Ethan heard every word clearly through the audio recording system. "Oh my God, Tiffany, where do you get all that money? Doesn't Ethan ask questions?" Tiffany laughed loudly, her dry laughter reverberating through the empty living room. "How could he ask? That stupid old man is busy merging those factories in Chicago. I just need to send a few photos of the child sleeping along with a stack of fake medical bills, and he transfers the money right away. He trusts me more than he trusts himself." "But what about the kid? Is she all right?" Tiffany took a sip of wine, her eyes showing contempt. "That burden is still in the shed. I told him the kid needs expensive new medication to sleep soundly, and he believed it instantly. Maya is truly a bottomless goldmine for me. I don't need to do anything as long as I keep her barely alive, so old Ethan feels responsible enough to keep sending money. Next month I'm buying another apartment in New York thanks to this gold mine." Ethan sat in the dark, his hand gripping the edge of the table. Those brazen confessions were being recorded word by word on the server. He watched Tiffany through the screen. She was touching up her makeup while boasting about her plan to siphon off his money for upcoming trips. Tiffany was talking non-stop when her phone on the table rang continuously. The default ringtone sounded interrupting the frivolous conversation. Tiffany looked down at the screen, her eyebrow slightly raised when she saw the caller ID. "Oh, husband dearest is calling. Probably checking on his daughter again. Wait a sec, let me finish this act." Tiffany put down her wine glass, took a deep breath to adjust her facial muscles. She smoothed her hair, putting on the sweetest and gentlest smile possible. From the second floor, Ethan coldly pressed the call button on his phone. He didn't take his eyes off the tablet screen, observing Tiffany's slightest movements through the hidden camera. He saw her put the phone to her ear, her voice as sweet as honey beginning to speak. "Darling, why are you calling me so late? You startled me." Ethan didn't reply immediately. He saw through the camera as Tiffany, while talking to him, motioned for her friend on the video call to be silent, her lips still holding the fake smile. "Tiffany, how is Maya?" "She's sleeping very soundly, dear. I just checked on her. The new medication seems to be working wonders. Please don't worry too much. I'm here." Ethan closed his eyes for a moment to suppress his disgust. He looked straight into the camera hidden in the eyes of the teddy bear, where Tiffany was standing opposite without knowing. "I'm right at the mansion gate, Tiffany. Come open the door." The tablet screen perfectly captured the moment the smile on Tiffany's face froze. The wine glass in her hand tilted, and a dark red streak spilled onto the floor like blood. Tiffany jumped up, almost dropping her phone, her eyes darting around the living room with extreme panic. Ethan ended the call. He stood in the dark of the second-floor office, looking down through the vent. Downstairs in the living room, Tiffany stood motionless, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She stared blankly into space, her face, which had just been radiant, now utterly pale. Ethan didn't wait any longer. He turned quickly, walking down the side hallway leading to the back fire escape. He sneaked out through the kitchen door, circling around the side of the house. The wind howled fiercely, driving snowflakes straight into Ethan's face. He took a deep breath, letting the chilling cold settle his anger. Ethan circled around to the front, stepping onto the stone steps of the main foyer. He stood before the large oak door and pressed the doorbell. The chime echoed steadily in the stormy night. Inside the mansion, Tiffany jumped. She frantically placed the wine glass on the table, but her hand was shaking so much that the wine spilled onto the carpet. Tiffany quickly grabbed a bottle of perfume from the shelf, spraying a heavy mist around herself to mask the smell of alcohol. She smoothed her hair, adjusted the silk dress shoulder that had slipped, and then walked toward the door. Tiffany took a deep breath, forcing a radiant smile onto her face. The door opened. Ethan stood there, his wool coat dusted with snow, his eyes red from the cold wind and exhaustion. "Ethan, are you really home? I thought I was dreaming." Tiffany rushed forward, wrapping her arms around Ethan's neck, embracing him tightly. She pressed her face into his chest, whimpering. "You have no idea how worried I was. The snowstorm was terrible. I kept calling and couldn't get through. I was afraid something happened to you on the way back from the airport." Ethan stood still. He didn't hug her back. The feeling of Tiffany's body touching his filled him with revulsion. The overwhelming scent of expensive perfume mixed with the smell of wine emanated from her. Ethan raised his hand, gripped Tiffany's wrist, and firmly pulled her away. He stepped past her, walking straight into the center of the brightly lit living room. "Where is Maya? I want to go up and see her." Tiffany paused for a beat. She quickly closed the door, turning back with a worried expression. She rushed ahead, blocking the bottom of the stairs leading to the second floor. "Darling, listen to me first. Don't go up there now." "Why, I just got back. I need to see how my daughter is." Tiffany stepped down one step, lowering her voice, her eyes glistening with tears. "Maya just had a very severe episode. This afternoon she suddenly panicked, smashed things, and screamed non-stop. I had to call the doctor immediately. They had to give her a sedative to help her sleep. The doctor warned not to startle her under any circumstances, or her condition will worsen." Ethan stared at Tiffany. He realized she was lying without batting an eye. She had concocted a perfect scenario of her dedication while the child was actually at the neighbor's house. "Tiffany, she's my daughter. I'll just stand and look from the door. I won't wake her up." "You can't, Ethan. You know Maya is sensitive to strangers. You've been away on business for a whole month and now you suddenly appear in the dark. She'll go crazy. I beg you, wait until morning. I had to spend the entire afternoon soothing her. She's only just settled down for a bit." Ethan silently observed the woman in front of him. She played the role of the exhausted wife, worried for her child too well. He stepped back, not attempting to climb the stairs anymore. He walked toward the coffee table in the center of the living room, where Tiffany had hastily placed her wine glass. "All right, if she's sleeping, then so be it. Let's talk about something else." Ethan opened his briefcase, pulled out a set of financial documents, and threw them hard onto the glass tabletop. The sharp impact startled Tiffany. "The $50,000 I wired last week? How do you explain it? The receipt says it was for special medical equipment." Tiffany was momentarily flustered, but she quickly regained her composure. She walked around the back of the TV cabinet drawer, pulling out a stack of professionally printed invoices with the Pinecrest Support Center logo. She placed them in front of Ethan, her voice full of grievance. "Do you think I used that money for my own pleasure? Look, a multifunctional therapy chair, a sleep sensor system, and the consulting fees for an expert from New York. Taking care of an autistic child is not just about feeding and dressing them, Ethan. It costs 100 times more than you imagine." Tiffany sat down on the sofa opposite him, wiping away her tears with her hand, her shoulders trembling violently. "You're in Chicago. All you do is sign checks and wire money. As for me, I have to stay here and face the child's tantrums, stay up all night when she runs a fever. Do you know how many opportunities I've sacrificed? I even turned down an invitation to be a brand ambassador just to stay home with Maya. And yet you come home, and the first thing you do is interrogate me like a criminal." Ethan picked up one of the invoices. "Pinecrest Center, $15,000 for specialized consultation." He realized the address on the invoice was the exact address of a high-end jewelry store he had seen in her expenditure diary earlier. Tiffany's brazenness had reached its peak. She wasn't just siphoning money, she was using Maya's difficulties as a shield for her greed. "Have you really struggled so much for Maya, Tiffany?" "I have done everything a mother could do, even more. I love Maya as my own child. If it weren't for me, who do you think would endure a child who never speaks a word and just shakes all day like that?" Tiffany looked up at Ethan, her eyes clearly showing accusation, hoping he would soften and come over to comfort her. But Ethan remained seated, motionless. He slowly reached out, picking up the remote control for the central audio and TV system placed on the table. His finger rested on the input button to switch to the surveillance camera system. "You're right. Taking care of Maya is very expensive. I was very curious about the experts you hired, about the piano lessons you mentioned." Ethan looked up, meeting Tiffany's eyes. The corner of his mouth lifted into a cold smile, a smile Tiffany had never seen in their year of marriage. "Let me show you where that money truly went and how your expert is treating Maya." Tiffany looked at the remote in Ethan's hand, then at the large TV screen hanging on the wall. A sense of foreboding ran down her spine. Tiffany intended to jump up to stop him, but Ethan's finger pressed the button firmly. The TV screen flashed, displaying the interface connected to the cloud server. Tiffany stood frozen, her breath becoming ragged as video folders began to appear, marked with the time frame of this very evening. Ethan never took his eyes off his wife's gradually pale face. "Watch this, Tiffany. This is the most expensive entertainment program I've ever purchased. How will Tiffany's perfect act unravel when that screen lights up? Will the crocodile tears still work when the stark truth is exposed? Don't look away. The most costly final act is about to begin." The 85-inch TV screen in the middle of the living room flashed brightly, casting a cold blue light onto Tiffany's stunned face. Instead of the usual entertainment programs, the interface of Ethan's cloud server system appeared. He clicked on the video file with a timestamp from less than an hour ago. The image was sharp down to every strand of hair. On the screen was Tiffany herself, still in this glamorous silk evening dress, but her face held a strange, deceptive look. She was holding her new designer bag, laughing with her friend over the phone. "That burden is still in the shed. Maya is truly a bottomless gold mine for me." The video then switched to the dark shed area through the infrared lens. Tiffany walked in casually, taking the wooden therapy toys Mr. David had painstakingly made for Maya, throwing them straight into the trash as if they were garbage. She even used the toe of her shoe to kick the tray of dry bread toward the trembling child. Tiffany's contemptuous laughter echoed throughout the actual living room, mixing with the sound emanating from the TV speakers. Tiffany stood rooted to the spot. Her face changed quickly from confusion to a deathly pale color. Her lips trembled violently, her eyes wide as she stared at herself on the screen. But then the shock was quickly replaced by a fit of rage. Tiffany's eyes were bloodshot. She screamed a piercing sound and lunged toward the TV cabinet. "Turn it off now! By what right do you spy on me, you jerk?" Tiffany frantically reached out to pull the power cord behind the screen, but Ethan was faster. He stepped forward, blocking her path. Ethan didn't use force. He just stood there, tall and steady. The authority of a man who managed an entire food empire, who had faced the most formidable opponents, created a pressure that made Tiffany stop. "You can't delete it, Tiffany. Everything has been transmitted directly to my company's secure server. My technical staff are watching it, and so is my lawyer." Tiffany took a step back, her breath coming in gasps. She knew she had no retreat. The mask of the gentle wife was torn away, revealing her true nature. She discarded the pitiful look, replacing it with sudden aggression. Tiffany pointed her finger at Ethan's face, her voice devoid of any sweetness. "Do you think you're so noble, Ethan? You dump a pile of money on me and disappear to Chicago for months. Do you know how cold this house is? Do you know how agonizing it is to take care of a child who never speaks, who just shakes all day like a ghost? I'm a woman. I need to be loved. I need to go out, not bury my youth babysitting your daughter. You agreed to take care of Maya when we married. I never forced you. I provided you with everything you wanted. Everything I wanted. I wanted a husband, not a cash machine. You abandoned this family. You forced me to become this way. I took your money to compensate for the lonely months in this icebox. That kid doesn't know anything, so who cares where she's locked up?" Ethan looked at the woman in front of him with deep disgust. He hadn't realized that his absence would be used by her as an excuse for her cruelty towards an innocent child. "Don't blame me for the rottenness in your soul. Maya is a special child, and you treated her like trash." Tiffany glanced at the grandfather clock on the wall. The long hand was pointing towards the 3. A dark thought flashed in her mind. Tiffany knew that Connecticut law was very sensitive to issues of violence against women. She knew how to turn herself into a victim in an instant. Tiffany suddenly stepped back, deliberately bumping hard into the decorative shelf, causing ceramic vases to fall and shatter on the floor. She raised both hands, using her long, meticulously manicured nails to fiercely scratch her arms and neck. Red marks appeared, and blood began to seep onto her porcelain skin. Tiffany continued to tear the shoulder of her expensive silk evening dress, making it ragged and messy. She used her hands to mess up her recently styled hair, turning herself into someone who had just gone through a violent struggle. Ethan stood still, astonished at the insane performance unfolding before his eyes. "What the heck are you doing?" Tiffany didn't answer. She snatched the landline phone on the table, quickly dialing 3 numbers, 911. The moment the other end picked up, Tiffany's voice completely changed. She was sobbing, her cries choked with hysterical broken breaths. "Help me? Please. 911, my husband, Ethan Hayes. He's gone mad. He's assaulting me in the living room. Please come to the Hayes mansion immediately. He's trying to harm me. I'm bleeding. Please." She dropped the phone to the floor. The worried voice of the operator still echoed on the other end. Tiffany looked at Ethan, her eyes clearly triumphant, despite her face being covered in fake tears. Completely contrary to Tiffany's expectation that Ethan would panic and rush to grab the phone or stop her, which would further solidify evidence of a struggle, Ethan appeared disturbingly calm. He slowly backed away, sitting down on the single sofa chair. Ethan crossed his arms over his chest, crossed his legs, watching Tiffany, as if observing a cheap play in a low-grade theater. "You're a good actress, Tiffany. I might have believed you if I weren't the one who personally installed the security system in this house." Tiffany paused for a moment, but she quickly regained her aggressiveness. "You just sit there and be smug. Connecticut police don't joke around. The wounds on my body are real, the torn clothes are real, and the distress call is real. Who do you think they'll believe, a cold millionaire like you or a woman trembling amidst this wreckage? You forgot one small detail." Ethan didn't say more. He just subtly looked up at the crystal chandelier on the ceiling and the large teddy bear in the corner. Tiffany followed his gaze. A tiny red light from the hidden camera lens was blinking steadily. Tiffany's face paled for a second, but then she burst into laughter, a twisted and challenging laugh. "A camera who cares? I'll say you forced me to do it myself, or that you edited the video. Sometimes the truth isn't as important as who cries the loudest, Ethan." Outside the window, the stormy night was sliced by swirling blue and red lights. The wail of police sirens echoed from a distance, growing louder and louder, until they stopped right outside the main gate. The headlights from the police vehicles swept across the living room, illuminating the wreckage and the woman draped on the floor. Tiffany slammed the landline phone onto the floor. She knelt amidst the broken ceramic pieces, bowing her head to let her hair hide the malicious smile clearly visible on her lips. "Welcome to your own hell, darling husband. Let's see how you explain yourself to those officers walking in." The front door was forcefully pushed open, and cold wind and snow rushed into the room. The heavy footsteps of the police echoed on the stone floor. Ethan remained seated on the sofa, his breathing steady, his eyes fixed on Tiffany, the one who was starting her first sobs to welcome the officers. Ethan subtly moved his finger on the remote control, knowing that the real final act was only just beginning. The mansion's front door burst open, revealing two police officers in thick uniforms. Storm wind and snow rushed into the living room, causing the curtains to flutter wildly. Tiffany immediately collapsed onto the stone floor, her shoulders shaking violently. She stretched her bleeding arm towards the officers, pointing her finger straight at Ethan with extreme terror. "Help me! He's gone completely crazy! Look what he did to me!" The two officers quickly approached. One bent down to help Tiffany. The other placed his hand on his gun holster and advanced toward Ethan. "Sir, we need you to stand up and put your hands above your head." Immediately, Ethan complied slowly. He stood up from the single sofa chair, raising both hands above his head. His face maintained a strangely calm demeanor in complete contrast to the wreckage of the broken vases and the woman weeping dramatically on the floor. "Officer, I'm cooperating. I am not armed." Tiffany saw that the police had controlled Ethan, and she sobbed even louder. She pulled open the torn shoulder of her dress, revealing red scratch marks on her skin. "He dragged me around the room. He tore my clothes, just because I said his daughter needed to go to the hospital. You have to arrest him now. He has money. He thinks he can do anything in this house. I'm genuinely afraid for my life." The younger officer looked at Tiffany's injuries and then turned to Ethan with a stern gaze. The situation was entirely against Ethan. According to Connecticut law, when there are clear signs of physical assault and a distress call from the victim, the police have the right and duty to arrest the suspect at the scene. "Mr. Hayes, these injuries are very clear. Do you have any explanation before we take you to the station?" Ethan looked straight into the officer's eyes. He had no intention of arguing or defending himself with words. He pointed toward the iPad placed on the glass coffee table right next to the wine glass Tiffany had left. Before you put the handcuffs on me, please watch the last 10 minutes of this video that's already open. It's stored directly on my corporation's cloud server and is completely tamper-proof. It will show you exactly what happened in this room 15 minutes ago. Tiffany momentarily froze, her sobs subsiding. The other officer picked up the iPad. The screen began to play the footage. Tiffany looked at the screen and her whole body began to tremble, but this time it wasn't acting. On the screen, a panoramic view of the living room appeared clearly. The scene began when Tiffany stood alone after Ethan left. The officers silently watched the vulnerable woman casually using her own nails to scratch her arms fiercely. They saw her grit her teeth as she tore her dress shoulder, then used her hands to mess up her hair in front of the mirror. The climax was the scene where Tiffany picked up the phone, took a deep breath to generate a panicked voice, and then dialed 911. The officer holding the iPad looked up, looking at Tiffany with a completely different expression. Contempt was clearly visible on his face. "You rehearsed quite thoroughly, Mrs. Hayes. You even tried your scream twice before dialing." Tiffany was about to speak, but just then the back door leading from the kitchen into the living room opened. Another wave of cold air rushed in, followed by Mr. David's footsteps. He was leading little Maya. Maya was still wearing Ethan's thick coat, her eyes darting around. As soon as she saw Tiffany sitting on the floor, Maya immediately backed up behind Mr. David, covering her ears with both hands, and her body began to shake violently out of reflex. "Officers, I'm Dr. David, this family's neighbor. I'm temporarily caring for little Maya." Mr. David stepped forward, handing the officer a small folder of documents. "I just performed a preliminary examination on the girl. Maya shows signs of severe malnutrition, old bruises on her body, and especially psychological distress from long-term confinement in an environment lacking light and warmth. What you see on Mrs. Hayes is self-staged, but what is on this child is the truth of mistreatment." The officer looked at Maya, a thin child, so scared she didn't dare to lift her head. He recognized the terrible contrast between Tiffany's luxurious appearance and the devastation of this autistic child. Tiffany started screaming, trying to crawl toward the police. "Don't listen to that old man, he hates me. Ethan hired him to frame me. It's a conspiracy to seize assets." "That's enough, ma'am." The older officer cut Tiffany off. He took the handcuffs from his belt. The sound of metal clicking was chilling in the luxurious living room. "Mrs. Hayes, you are being arrested for filing a false report, false accusation of assault, and especially for severe child abuse. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say from this moment on will be used as evidence against you in court." Tiffany began to struggle as the officer pulled her arms behind her back. The handcuffs locked onto her wrists with a crisp click. All the arrogance and glamour of the Hayes Mansion's queen vanished completely. She was now just a criminal with messy hair and a torn dress created by her own hands. Ethan walked closer to Maya. He knelt down gently, hugging the little girl. Maya leaned her head on her father's shoulder, her small hands tightly gripping Ethan's coat lapel. He felt his daughter's rapid heartbeat slowly stabilize as she felt his protective presence. "Take her away, officer. I don't want my daughter to see this person for another second." The police lifted Tiffany to her feet. She could no longer scream, only muffled sobs of indignation and fear. They led her out the front door where the police cars were still flashing lights continuously. The snow was still falling thickly outside. Tiffany was escorted through the main foyer. She turned her head back to look at the splendid mansion one last time, a place she once thought she would rule forever through her lies. Her eyes met Ethan's. He was standing in the middle of the living room, holding Maya tightly. His eyes no longer filled with anger, but only the cold contempt reserved for a betrayer. The officer pushed Tiffany's head down for her to step into the back seat of the police car. The car door slammed shut completely, severing Tiffany from her privileged world. The car drove away, leaving long tracks in the snow, carrying the person who had inflicted pain on an innocent child. Ethan stood there, holding his daughter close, the warmth from Maya helping him realize that although he had lost too much time, at least tonight, the truth had won. The last police car drove away, its sirens fading into the night. The Hayes Mansion, which was once brightly lit, now fell into a heavy silence. The light from the colored string lights still flashed in the main foyer, but they only added to the emptiness and coldness of the living room full of broken ceramic pieces. Ethan still sat on the floor holding Maya tightly. She was no longer trembling violently as before, but her small hands still clung tightly to her father's coat lapel, never daring to let go for a moment. Ethan felt his daughter's breath on his neck, a faint breath, but filled with absolute trust. He looked up at Mr. David, who stood quietly beside him with a thoughtful expression. "David, please don't leave. Tonight, I can't stay here alone with her." "I'll stay. You need rest, Ethan, and so does Maya." Ethan nodded. He picked Maya up, but just as he was about to walk away, a phone rang persistently. It was Tiffany's phone, abandoned on the coffee table amidst the pile of fake invoices. A name appeared on the screen: Mom. Ethan looked at the phone vibrating fiercely. He placed Maya on the sofa and slowly picked up the device. He didn't hesitate to press the answer button and turn on the speakerphone. "Tiffany, how did it go? Did you get the merger money yet? I warned you not to do anything too obvious that would make the old man suspicious." The voice of an older woman sounded full of eagerness and greed. Ethan was silent for a few seconds, a feeling of disgust surging as he realized Tiffany hadn't acted alone. She had a whole system of support behind her. "Mrs. Hayes, Tiffany won't be able to answer you." The other end fell silent, a silence so long that Ethan thought the call had been disconnected. "Ethan, why is it you... Where is Tiffany?" "The police just took her away for filing a false report and child abuse. I suggest you find a good defense attorney because I won't let her get out of prison soon." Ethan waited for panic, a plea, or at least a question about Tiffany's condition. But the reaction of the mother on the other end made both Ethan and Mr. David shudder. "I told her. 3 years ago when she decided to enter your house, I told her not to build a life on lies. She was too greedy, and now she made her bed so she must lie in it. Don't call me again." A sharp toot-toot sounded. The woman hung up without a word of concern for her daughter. Tiffany had been abandoned by her own family the moment she was no longer useful. Ethan placed the phone on the table, feeling as if he had touched something utterly filthy. Even her own mother turned against her. That's terrifying. That's the price of treating kinship as a business tool, Ethan. Ethan sighed, turning to look at Mr. David. He owed his neighbor too much. Without him, perhaps he would be sitting in the police station now explaining a crime he didn't commit, and Maya would still be shivering in the dark shed. "David, thank you. I don't know how to repay you. If it weren't for your observations all this time, I would have lost everything." Mr. David didn't reply immediately. He slowly reached into his coat pocket, pulling out a thick file wrapped in a waterproof plastic bag. He placed it on the table, right next to Tiffany's stack of invoices. "You don't owe me anything, Ethan. I did this for Maya and for Sarah, too. These are not just medical notes." Ethan took the file. When he opened it, he was stunned. Inside were not ordinary prescriptions or medical reports. It was a compilation of signed statements from all the former nurses, tutors, and housekeepers of the Hayes family, the ones Tiffany had fired 6 months ago. "What is this, David?" "For the past 6 months, when she banned me from entering the gate, I tracked down the former employees based on the business card you gave me last year. I went to their homes. Tiffany had threatened them, forcing them to keep quiet if they wanted to receive their contract severance. But when I told them about Maya's condition, they agreed to write statements." Ethan flipped through the pages. Detailed testimonies appeared. Tiffany cutting Maya's food portions, locking the child in a room to free herself for parties, using insults to suppress a child who couldn't defend herself. Worse, the file also contained letters of confirmation from Ethan's personal lawyer in Connecticut. "You contacted my lawyer." "That's right. I sent him the evidence a month ago. The petition to terminate Tiffany's custody rights has been prepared and submitted to the district court as an emergency filing. As long as the police confirm the scene tonight, you will regain full custody of your daughter immediately without going through any lengthy investigation procedures by Child Protective Services. I didn't want the little girl to be in an orphanage for even an hour while waiting for you to prove your innocence." Ethan looked at the file, then at the old neighbor with white hair. He realized that money millionaire status and his private jets were completely useless against Tiffany's malice. It was the silent kindness, perseverance, and meticulousness of a senile neighbor that saved his daughter's future. I was so wrong to think that just sending a lot of money was enough. I bought my daughter $1 million room, but I let her live in hell. Money is not at fault, Ethan. The fault lies in using it to replace your own presence. Maya doesn't need a millionaire. She needs a father. Ethan knelt beside Maya, taking her small, cold hand. He looked around the mansion at the gold-framed mirrors and Tiffany's portraits hanging on the walls. Everything here exuded falsehood and betrayal. This house was no longer a home. It was a prison filled with painful memories. I'm going to sell this house, David, tomorrow. I don't want the little girl to see anything here anymore. Where are you going? I'm taking Maya to Florida or California. Somewhere with year-round sunshine where snow never covers the pathways and she can play on the beach without fear of being locked in a shed. I'm putting everything on hold at the corporation. I'm going to be a real father. Mr. David smiled, nodding in agreement. That's the wisest decision you've ever made. But tonight, don't stay here. Maya won't be able to sleep in this house. Come to mine. Ethan picked Maya up. He didn't take anything from the mansion except David's file and Maya's worn-out teddy bear he found discarded in the kitchen corner. They walked out the front door. Ethan didn't bother to lock it. He didn't look back at the brightly lit mansion even once. In the warm living room of Mr. David's house, the fire in the fireplace crackled, radiating a gentle warmth. Maya sat on the large armchair in Ethan's lap. She had finished the hot soup David prepared and was now drifting off to sleep. Her small hands still held tightly onto Ethan's pinky finger like an unbreakable bond. Ethan leaned his head against the chair back, watching the flames dance. The feeling of peace after the storm brought him comfort. He knew there was still a long legal battle ahead with Tiffany, but with David's file, the outcome was clear. Most importantly, he had regained his daughter's trust. Outside the window, the snowstorm had completely stopped some time earlier. The dark night sky began to turn a pale grayish blue. The first rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, illuminating the white snow covering the garden. The snow began to melt under the weak but persistent heat of the early morning sun. Ethan looked out the window, seeing drops of water dripping steadily from the eaves. A new beginning was coming. No more lies, no more elaborate false fronts. There was only him, Maya, and a new life waiting ahead where the sunshine would heal his daughter's emotional wounds. Maya stirred in her sleep, her small lips curving into a slight smile. Ethan bent down and gently kissed her forehead silently, promising himself in Sarah's spirit that from now on he would never let his daughter be lonely again. The dawn had arrived, and the darkness of the Hayes mansion had truly faded into the past. Money can build a magnificent castle, but only the presence of love turns it into a home. Do not use material wealth to replace the responsibility of a father, because when care is absent, evil will use the name of love to sow pain. The truth may be obscured by sophisticated masks, but the light of kindness and devotion will always find a way out. Note: the story above is entirely fictional. The characters' names, locations, and details have been constructed for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real people or actual events is purely coincidental.